It does not take much reading between the lines in order to realize the very tense situation that is being described by St. Luke in today's Gospel for the feast of the Nativity of St. John the Baptist. The drama is as much about Elizabeth as it is about John himself. I can feel the exasperation of Elizabeth in the Gospel narrative today. Imagine this woman who gets pregnant in her old age, and her husband suddenly, instead of rejoicing about it, withdraws into silence. What else could this mean to the relatives and the neighbors? I think they suspected that Zechariah's silence was an indicator that he did not believe that the child in Elizabeth's womb was his. No wonder St. Luke tells us Elizabeth did not leave the house for 5 months. Nagtago siya. Take note, Zechariah did not regain his voice on the day that the child John was born. Kahit nagse-celebrate tayo ng birth of John the Baptist, the real drama did not happen on the day he was born. The real drama happened on the day the child was circumcised, which according to Jewish tradition was 8 days after the birth of the child. That was the day the child was supposed to be given a name by his father. Hindi siya binibigyan ng pangalan pagkasilang. It's only 8 days later that the ritual of giving a name is done on the day itself that the male child is being circumcised. And to give a name means to be publicly acknowledged by the father as a legitimate child. Kung ikaw nasa posisyon ni Elizabeth, I wonder what you would have done if your husband remained silent on the day he was supposed to name his child. The image that I get of Elizabeth in this scene is that of a feisty woman who asserts herself. The nosy relatives and neighbors are described by St. Luke as a faceless and a nameless crowd of kibitzers who act like a chorus in a Greek drama, para bang chuwariwap. Elizabeth stands up to them and, as it were, is saying to them, ano ngayon kung tumahimik ang asawa ko? So what if his father is silent and cannot give a name to his child? Di ako magpapangalan. I will name him myself. And his name is John. But the relatives would continue to rub it in. They will object to the name that she's giving. And they would ask, bakit hindi mo ipangalan sa tatay? And what they're really trying to insinuate is, di ba dapat yung tatay ang magbibigay ng pangalan? They want to see him react. In short, they want to see a reaction in the face of Zechariah to confirm nga their suspicion about the silence, the sudden silence of Zechariah. St. Luke brings the drama to a resolution when Zechariah asks for a writing tablet and he writes, his name is John. And then he dramatically gained or regained his voice. His declaration, his name is John, is a vindication of Elizabeth. It amounts to saying, tama ang misis ko. Alam niyo pa sa kanya, tama siya. The boy's name is John. He is called John, which is from the Hebrew Yohanan, which means he is a gift of God. I think St. Luke is deliberately portraying Zechariah here as a representation of the Israelite nation. Kasi, like Zechariah, Israel has also languished in silence for the past ilang years, centuries before John, because wala na silang naririnig na propeta. No prophet had ever been heard among them again. It meant that they had become unable to hear God's voice because of their hardness of heart. And it is this child, John, who will make them hear God's voice all over again. You know, Elizabeth's declaration today reminds me of the story of another woman in the Bible, Sarah, the wife of Abraham, in the book of Genesis. According to the writer, natawa daw si Sarah. She laughed when she was told by the guests na magkakaroon siya ng anak pretty soon. Back then, she laughed. Kaya siya natawa because she found the statement ridiculous. Sabi siguro niya, ngayon pang tuyot na ako. But when she got pregnant and actually gave birth to a boy, she also named the child Isaac. And the word Isaac is from the Hebrew word Yitzhak. Meron ngang isang presidente ng Israel, Yitzhak Rabin. That's the same as Isaac, which means, and she laughed. At natawa siya. Yitzhak, Isaac, the name means, and she laughed. Her laughter of ridicule was changed into a laughter of vindication and rejoicing. She said, God has given me cause to laugh, and all who hear of it will laugh with me. You know, sometimes it takes a while before we get to realize the real significance of the things that are happening sa buhay natin. Sometimes, after grieving what we may have thought was a loss or a tragedy, we look back and then we begin to see the hand of God in it. And then we realize that what we thought was a tragedy was actually a blessing in disguise. That is what Isaiah is also saying in our first reading today. The prophet is expressing Israel's lament over the tragic things that had happened to them after the exile, how they had been dispersed in foreign lands. Yun ang tinawag na diaspora. At most, the only thing that they were dreaming about was for the day of vindication to come. A day when God would raise up the tribes of Jacob and restore the survivors of Israel. Meaning, a day when makauwi silang muli at may tayo nilang muli ang kanilang bansa. But the prophet declares that God had an even greater plan than that. The thought of rebuilding their nation, according to him, was too little. Parang sinasabi ni God, ang baba naman ng pangarap nyo. God had allowed them to be dispersed all over the world because He intended to make of them a light to the Gentiles so that His salvation may reach the ends of the earth. Hindi ba ganyan din ang kwento ng ating mga Pilipino, ang ating mga OFWs na nagkalat na parang alikabok sa lahat ng mga bansa sa buong daigdig? Wala daw yatang bansa na walang Pinoy, mga OFW. Now, our migrant Filipinos are being acknowledged even by Pope Francis as the new missionaries. You remember that Mass, which he celebrated with Cardinal Chito Tagle and with the OFWs in Rome, in order to commemorate the 500th year of Christianity in the Philippines? And remember that homily where he called the OFWs mga contrabandistas de la fe, which is Spanish for smugglers of the faith. Mga smuggler daw tayo ng pananampalataya. Now we realize that their dispersal was for a purpose that may not have been obvious at the start. It was not a tragedy, but a blessing. One that would realize their prophetic mission, like that of John the Baptist, to let God be heard again through them by a world that is longing to be renewed and recreated by God's transformative voice.